Hello everyone. Today I wanted to talk about Condition Reaper, considering that we just had a recent patch in July 8th, 2020. So let's get started. Before we talk about the build, let's talk about equipment. So generally for your equipment, you want Vipers, everything. The Viper stats are going to be power, precision, condition damage, and expertise. Now, if you're in a situation where, like me, you don't have the ascended gear that provides that, what you can do is you can go with Rampagers. Rampagers provides power, precision, and condition damage. And you want Rune of the Elementalist. Now, Rune of the Elementalist is kind of expensive for the 6 set. If you're like a new player, I think it's roughly like about 3 to 5 gold. So if this is too expensive for you, you can use the Superior Rune of the Crate, which increases condition damage, but it also extends your bleeding duration. Okay. So for our weapon sets, and weapon set 1, we'll be using a Scepter and a Dagger. And then for our second weapon set, we'll be using the Greatsword. Generally, you want to be using weapon set 1, the Scepter and the Dagger, for condition damage and applying it over 80%, or excuse me, over 50%. Because once you get to 50%, you're going to want to switch to your weapons. So you're going to want to switch to your Greatsword, because your Greatsword will then start your execution phase rotation. Um, so with that being said, let's move on into the builds. So for solo and open world build, what I started to use was this form of the build. We're going to be using Curses, Blood Magic, and Reaper. The something to keep in mind about this build, the point of a Condition Reaper is you're going to be chilling, and then once you chill, you want to crit against the target, because your crits will then also create more chilling, and every time you chill, you want, with the Reaper trait, which we'll go into, you apply a stack of bleeding. So what does this mean with the build and everything, and how does this pull together? So for this first build, we want to be using Barb Precision, because it gives us a chance to apply an extra bleed. Chilling Darkness, every time we blind a target, we will also apply Chill. This really plays into the Reaper trait line, which we'll get more into in a second. Furious Demise, you gain Fury when entering Shroud. Extra critical chance is wonderful. Master of Corruption. This is really stable for the build, because you will be using this along with Blood is Power. Basically what it does is this adds another condition on you when you apply it. Blood is Power. It gives you might, but at the cost of self-bleeding and self-torment. Now this comes into play with the Dagger ability, because Deathly Swarm Dagger 4, this allows us to transfer 2 conditions. So here we will put on 2 conditions, bleeding and self-torment, and then we can send them with Deathly Swarm. Then we go into Target the Weak. Increases your critical hit chance for each condition on the foe. So, I mean, you gain condition damage, and you also gain crit chance for each condition that is on the target. This is really good for increasing your condition damage. Now, on the Grandmaster trait here, you really have 2 choices for PvE content. So, if you're having trouble staying alive, Parasitic Contagion is great, because you heal for a percentage of your condition damage. Like I said, this plays more into the Blood Magic trait, which we'll get to in a second, but this is a great choice because it helps heal you, but it just comes at the cost of about 10 to 12% damage. And the reason that is because normally you would take Lingering Curse. This massively increases your condition damage from your Scepter abilities and all your other abilities. It also changes your normal Scepter 3 from a single target damage to an AoE. So without this, without Devouring Darkness, normally our bleeds would do about 601, but we can boost it up to about 1,000 damage. That's pretty good. That's almost like a 40% increase. So that's a major DPS boost for you. Now, I'm using Blood Magic in case someone is new to Reaper and wants to play it. They're having difficulty with survivability. This is something you can use to help you survive. Lesser Mark of Blood allows you to drop a mark. Like if you've used the staff before, this is staff 2. So when you roll in combat, every 8 seconds, you drop a mark, and when an enemy hits it, you provide regeneration and 2 stacks of bleeding. So small heal, does some damage, but it adds 2 stacks of bleeding, which is great. This ability is fantastic, the Lesser Signet of Vampirism, because we get this ability called Blood Bond, and every time we put at least 4 stacks of bleeding on an enemy, it triggers, and they get kind of the signet mark on them, and then you just siphon more health. Vampiric, your minions siphon health, and they heal you and the minion itself. Vampiric Presence, your party and your nearby allies, they siphon health and they heal themselves. You do more damage with this while you're in Reaper Shroud, so that's fantastic. Last Rites, this is really good because if you're going to be self-sustaining and self-healing, unfortunately the lower the health the more healing you do, but you want this mainly for Last Rites, as that is a party saver. As your parties and nearby allies, they will not lose health while down for 9 seconds. So this gives you a great opportunity to get them up. And then finally, the new Grandmaster trait that they gave us, because they just felt Wells were not getting as much play, is Blood Bank. This ability looks phenomenon. Blood Bank is health gained over your maximum health is converted into a barrier. Now your barrier is normally is defined by your healing power. So you get some of healing power right here, and you get some regeneration. Although regeneration doesn't trigger, it can help heal you to full, so then your other siphoning abilities and this and that become barrier. So it's really great for that. So this is the healing aspect. This is more if you're bleeding and stacking your damage. Let's talk about the Reaper spec. So in this trait line, you start with Reaper Shroud. Basically, you get 20% critical chance when you get into Reaper, and you get more melee based attacks, which is fine. The first ability that is mandatory, Chilling Nova. You create a Nova at the target that damages and chills nearby foes. So basically, you chill a target, and then once you critically hit against a chill target, you create an explosion that chills in an adjacent area. It's a small area, but still, it chills. This is going to be one of your biggest things that stacks your bleeding, which we're going to get to here in a minute. When you inflict fear, you also chill. This is nice utility for Shroud 3, but generally speaking, this isn't something we're normally concerned with. Now this trait, these 3 trait lines right here, these are all viable choices, but for this build, we run with Chilling Victory. Striking a chilled foe grants might and life force. So it doesn't even necessarily mean that it has to be a crit. If you just hit them, you get might every 1 second. And if you hit multiple enemies with one ability, you'll get multiple stacks of might and life force. This is good for building up your Reaper Shroud. Now, if you're still having difficulty surviving, and you want more healing with a little bit more damage, then you can take Soul Eater. Just keep in mind that you need to be within a melee range, essentially. But basically, when you strike foes within that 300 range, you do 10% extra damage, and you heal for 5% of the damage that you do. So it's a nice little bit of healing, especially if you're using Parasitic Contagion to help with your heals, and Blood Bank that can transfer into a really nice form of barrier and damage mitigation for yourself. Now, if you don't like either of those and you're not really concerned about life force, then you can always take Decimate Defenses, which basically, if you hit something with vulnerability, which with Greatsword it works, you have 2% chance per stack you get an increase of 2%. So if you're fighting a boss and it has 25 stacks of vulnerability, you just got 50% increase of crit, which is good because if you chill it, that means you're going to be chilling much more. And then that's going to take us to our last one, which is Deathly Chill. Chill deals damage over time. So every time you crit with Chilling Nova, you chill them, and every time you chill them, you add 2 stacks of bleeding. And this is great because our chill lasts longer and chill foes take more damage from your attacks. So chilling is literally the key to this build. And so with that being said, let's talk about how we can go ahead and get started. So the best ways to chill, it's by blinding your target. It's by blinding your target. There's a few abilities that you have that can do that for you. So on your scepter, the one ability that does it is Deathly Swarm. It blinds and it chills. So you're off to a great start there. And then you just crit as long as your opponent is chilled. And then on your greatsword, you have this. It's called Nightfall. You basically bring down this little well-looking thing. And if your opponent is in it, you'll put 4 stacks of blindness on it, which means you also chill. Something else, if you're not confident about maintaining your chill, that you can also utilize is the shout called Suffer. You damage foes and you chill them. You also transfer conditions, which is something that works really well with your Deathly Swarm and your Blood is Power. So that is an alternative you can use. But personally for me, once you chill a target and you chill enemies, it's pretty easy to maintain it, especially in an AoE pack. So let's go into something else as well. So in order for our conditions to be really good, applying vulnerability to the enemy is a really good thing for us to be considering and figuring out how to do. So for my build, I like to run Well of Suffering. And this is great because if you can chill your target and then you drop Well of Suffering, your will has a chance to crit on them, applying more chilling and then applying vulnerability. It's a really good combo and something to consider as well. The stacks of vulnerability will also increase your incoming condition damage, which means when you're in your Scepter Dagger mode, you can burst for a lot more. Something that the Reaper doesn't have too much of, you could consider your Reaper Shout as like a secondary life amount of health for you. But if you're still getting hit by targets a lot, then I like running You Are All Weaklings just for the fact that it damages, it can crit, it breaks stun, and it applies weakness and fumble. More or less, the fumble is the best part. And it also gains you at least 5 stacks of might, and then you'll get an additional might per enemy hit. So it's really good for stacking up might. It's really good for reducing the amount of damage you'll take from enemies around you. It can crit, which means you can apply more chill, and it's a really fantastic choice. I'm using for my healing ability, we're using Signet of Vampirism, mainly because it just got reworked, so now it just steals health from an enemy. So it goes into that effect that you're consistently just healing yourself. And then finally, because our minions are able to steal health and heal themselves and do some things, this is a great way to, this is great for CC bars. So having a minion out it just helps you with a little bit more control. The fact that they can charge and knock down enemies and the fact that they can launch and knock down, it's great. So if you're not really interested in that, a good secondary option is for control. You can always run Chill to the Bone because it chills, it gives you stability, and it stuns. So it's fantastic. Let's go into a more DPS, like a pure DPS focus kind of build. So we're going to maintain curses and the whole trait line that we're naturally using. But since we're not necessarily focused on healing ourselves and and that kind of thing. We're going to be more focused on like an execute phase. Um, so I'm running Spike. Shroud 1 skill gains, it gains you might. Excellent, helps us stack might. Chilling a foe inflicts vulnerability. That's a really easy for this build. It's quite easy to stack up. We get 9.5 seconds of, and we get 3 stacks every time we chill. So you can stack this up really quickly. Does Embrace deals more when you're down. Well, you generally don't want to be downed. But the biggest thing is when you strike a foe below 50%, you inflict 5 stacks of vulnerability every 10 seconds. So you've got some extra things coming there. Now, on this trait line, these 3 here weren't that great of choices. Personally, with this build, you'll be granting yourself enough might that you don't really need this one because you gain less condition damage, which is kind of counterintuitive to the build. Signets, it's not worth it because you're only running 1 signet. Now if you're switching or using something else, then maybe it's worth considering. And these usually only affect the changes that this provides is only when you're in Shroud, so you're not really in Shroud that much, so it's not worth utilizing. So we stick with Chill of Death. Cast Lesser Spinal Shivers on a foe when attacking them while their health is below the threshold. So the threshold for this whole trait line is 50%, so when you hit anything under 50%, these will trigger. This one happens every 20 seconds. You chill your target and remove up to 3 boons, dealing extra damage based on the number of boons you remove. The fact that if they have boons on the target, that's great. If they don't, that's fine as well. What you'll end up doing is just applying chill and vulnerability, which is what you want. So if they have boons, you definitely get a great bonus out of it. But if they don't have boons, it's nothing to sweat. Gain might when you strike a foe below the health threshold. This is where you stack up your might really quickly. And like I said, what you'll be doing when you hit that under 50% is you'll be going through, you'll just be using your abilities, and then you can either be spamming Gravedigger, but generally you'll be switching back and forth to maintain your conditions, because you'll still be getting might because of this, and you'll be applying your conditions, you'll be applying a lot of vulnerability, so you just want to maintain your natural rotation. But while you're above 50%, you'll just still be using this. But even still, as you hit them, you'll be gaining 3 might every 1 second. And then since we like getting might under 50%, we might as well increase our damage. So when they're under 50%, we automatically get a free 20% increase in damage. So this makes us really good for the execute phase, because this means our bleedings will hit harder, our normal abilities will hit harder as well. We'll be stacking a ton of might. So we're in a good position as it is. And then the fact that we'll also be putting vulnerability, so we're making our enemies take more damage while we also are increasing our damage. That is it for the build pretty much itself. Now combos, what you want to be considering. Normally what I would like to do is I'll do Blood is Power first to start off the fight, so you get your 2 conditions on you, and then you'll transfer them with number 4. You have to have a target, obviously. And then you can just start dropping your 5, and then number 2, and then you'll drop your number 3. And that'll do mass AoE, and then you'll convert boons, and then you'll gain life force, so it's good that way. Also to note, I guess I should have mentioned this with my weapons, sorry. With my weapons, I'm using Super Sigil of Earth just to put extra bleeding on the target, so every 6 seconds, every 2 seconds if I crit, there's more bleeding. This one is something I thought was very unique. Just because sometimes if your Dagger 4 skill, if there's an issue with it and it doesn't transfer conditions, this can help also transfer it as well. So that's why I use one Superior Sigil of Generosity. If you're not concerned about that, if you have healers, then you can switch it to Bursting, which increases your condition damage by 5%. So, like I said, above 50%, blood is power, to using your Deathly Swarm, because now it's chilled, then you can start dropping your other abilities on it. And then you'll use Devouring Darkness. You'll drop your Well as well, because if they're still chilled, you can still keep them chilled by critting against them. Um, if there's multiple enemies and you're in range, make sure you use your All Weaklings to give you extra might on top of this might you have here. And then once you hit 50% and under, start using these abilities here. This chills and blinds, and then you can use this. This adds 12 stacks of vulnerability. It's a really nice ability, especially if it crits, because if you're under 50%, you can spam it until you switch weapons. And then this is something great to use just because, I mean, it chills and applies stuff. But if you're facing like a non-boss, what you can do is you can initiate combat using Blood is Power. So once you're in combat, then you can roll for it. You'll drop a mark, and then you can drag them into it, and then drop Nightfall. And that'll help inflict bleeding and other damages on them. So it's a nice little combo, nice little trick to control the field and to do burst condition damage. And that's pretty much it. Which food you want to be using? You want to be using bowls of kale saute and your toxic focusing crystals, Viper gear, and you'll be set to go. And I'm hoping someone will look at this and maybe tweak it a little bit more, so that way it can be used in harder PvE content such as raids. This is good control for fractals. You might even be able to tweak this build so that way it's more for PvP. But before anyone else went out there and started posting Reaper builds and this and that, I wanted to be ahead of the curve and just post my video and my belief in how I've been playing it. I've been using this for Heart of Thorns content, and it's been fantastic. So thank you for checking out the video. If you like it, you can like, comment, and subscribe. This is a new channel. I am trying new things. I'm starting to build myself up, but this is something I just wanted to initiate. Thanks, and have a great day.